What's up, BookTube? Sandy back here with a video that is going to be how I'm going to begin to close the year 2021. I'm excited about it, even though I have not read a whole lot of books here in the month of December of 2021, but I am capping off what was a pretty solid reading year. I'm gonna wait before I give away what I did in terms of my Goodreads reading goal for the year. I did beat it, but there is one more book that I might end up reading before I close 2021. But for this particular video, the results are already in. I'm pretty confident about these results. I'm gonna give you some of my year-end book awards for the top books that I read, and should be kind of interesting because some are maybe not what you would expect, but it was still a lot of fun. I'll be back. First, I'm going to begin with my classic book of the year, and this is a book that I read actually pretty recently, and it's also a book that I've read before, so it's a rare reread for me, but I had gotten some renewed interest in the movies, and I decided to reread The Godfather. And this is a very old copy, as you can tell, of this book, and yet it's actually got some Scotch tape here to hold the cover back in place. But I was really excited to read this again because a book like this, if you've seen the movie The Godfather, if you've ever read the book, there are things that you may have missed when you originally watched the movies or when you read the book. And there's always something new that you're gonna pick up, or it seems like you're gonna pick up each time you read it. So this is the Mario Puzo classic that really spawned the great movies. I think 3 great movies, 2 outstanding movies that are 2 of the best movies of all time, and a third movie that some people think is not very good. I think it is good, it's just not as good as the first 2 movies. So that being said, this is great. This book really does a great job of filling in some of the holes of things that you saw in the movie and you kind of maybe had some questions about why things happened the way that they did. And this book goes a long way to answering a lot of those questions by giving you some of the background information that you simply don't have time, even in movies as long as Godfathers 1 and 2, and 3 for that matter. They're all fairly lengthy movies, but this was really great. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I reread it. It was really good to just again refresh myself with the greatness that was and still is The Godfather. Next up is my nonfiction book of the year, and for my nonfiction book of the year, I kind of went on a little bit of a tear in November reading some nonfiction books, and for some people, November is nonfiction November, and it didn't start out that way for me, but it kind of ended that way for me. And one of the nonfiction books that I was really excited about was The Mozart of Basketball, The Remarkable Life and Legacy of Drazen Petrovic by Todd Speer. And this book was really important to me. Drazen Petrovic died in a tragic car accident in Germany, and it has some reaction to his tragic, unexpected death when he was really just beginning to find himself as a great basketball player in the NBA. He had been an incredibly good basketball player overseas, playing for Yugoslavia and then Croatia after the Civil War and the split of Yugoslavia. And this book it just really speaks to who he was, his incredible work ethic, his starting out at such a young age, which they do, the European players do, and then trying to be a breakthrough European player in the United States. Now you take it for granted that European players, the great European players, are coming to the US and they're doing well, but during his time, that wasn't really the case. In the late 80s and early 90s, it was pretty rare to see, a significant number of European players, and he was one of those players that really started the breakthrough. And so it was really fascinating to read about this, to learn a little bit more about his life, his legacy. I knew a lot about him, but I found out even more reading this book. I'm definitely glad I picked this up. It was a really fun read. If you're not a sports fan, it might not be interesting to you, but yet it might, because his story is very fascinating, right up to his very tragic, shocking death that really rocked the basketball world. So, The Mozart of Basketball, The Remarkable Life and Legacy of Drazen Petrovic, outstanding book, easily my nonfiction book of the year. Next up, I don't typically read a lot of series, but this year I had my eyes on a series that I really wanted to read. I had 3 of the books, and then a 4th book in the series came out, and I decided that now was the time. I decided to strike while the iron was hot because I really wanted to read the 4th one, but I wanted to read the first 3 as well, and that is the Truly Devious series. And so the Truly Devious series was just truly very good for me. Some people aren't quite feeling it, and I totally get it, but I really got hooked. The character of Stevie Bell I thought was really fascinating, with the detective work, the kind of Nancy Drew kind of thing going on, which was really fascinating to me. The dual timeline thing that happens in these books, sometimes I really struggle with dual timelines, but in this case I really enjoyed it. And I really, even though there's a ton of characters that can really make things kind of confusing, I really focused on Stevie Bell's character, the main character in the books, and that really helped me to work through these books and really to enjoy this series tremendously. And so, it's got the prep school thing, it's got mysteries going on. I know there's some people that aren't satisfied because there are cliffhangers at the end of the books. Obviously, it's a series, and so that kind of bothers some people, not having finality. Sometimes when you invest a lot of time in a book, you want that sense of finality, you want a completion, and then when you don't get it, sometimes that can be frustrating. But for me, it was not. I went in expecting something of a cliffhanger at the end of each of the books, and that's kind of what you get, but at the same time, very enjoyable. The Truly Devious series by Maureen Johnson. Next up, before I get into my fiction book of the year, I want to talk about some of the contenders for the fiction book of the year, some of the other fiction books that I really enjoyed in 2021. There were a lot of books that I really enjoyed, but I picked out, 4 books that I really enjoyed, in addition to the book that I picked as my book of the year. And it actually could be 5 books, because I could easily put Taylor Jenkins Reid, Daisy Jones and the Six, I could put in there as well. That was a really good book as well. That was a book with a cool format, an interview type format, which was very interesting. So let's go ahead and add that. That'll be my 5th sort of runner-up, if you will, in terms of book of the year. But here are some of the other ones. One is Ace of Spades. I really enjoyed Ace of Spades. It was kind of predictable in a lot of ways, but yet it was very interesting. A prep school setting, a mystery of students who are brought to this school for a purpose that is not necessarily good, and there's a mystery that ensues that needs to be solved, and kind of a dramatic ending. Though the ending again was kind of predictable, it was still a very, very fun read. I'm glad I read Ace of Spades. Next up of the contenders is My Heart is a Chainsaw. And I really enjoyed this book because I'm a big horror movie fan, and this has a ton of great horror movie references in this book that I really, really, really enjoyed. So if you're a fan, especially of 80s horror movies, you're really gonna like this book and the little tidbits that are in this book. This was really fun. This was a book I saw. Stephen Graham Jones is the author, and when it came out as a pre-order, I was like, whoa, okay, the title really jumped out and grabbed me, and I was glad I jumped into this. Just a fun book. Film school students, murder, mystery, the references to historical horror. It was just really cool to read. So definitely glad I picked this one up. My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. Next up is probably the most powerful read, or one of the most powerful books that I read all year, and that is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. And it has to do with LGBTQ+, murder, racism, and two fathers looking for answers, looking for revenge. And it is very uncomfortable, very triggering in a lot of spots, but a very, very powerful read. I am one of those people that can read and kind of put some of the ugly parts of it in perspective. So some of the racism, homophobia in particular in this book, I was able to put that aside and really focus on what the book was trying to say. And so very, very powerful read, Razorblade Tears, but definitely not for everybody. Lastly, speaking of horror, I'm gonna go back to The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. And this was a book that I was really looking forward to reading this year. There was a controversy, of course, with Riley Sager's Final Girls book that some people saw and kind of had going on there in Twitter sphere for a while. But this was really good. It starts off really strong with an incident that happens, and it really gets you hooked on the support group and what the individuals in the support group went through, and you start to see some relationships, good and bad, and things happen that are really definitely attention grabbing is kind of the way I'll say it without trying to give too much of it away. But this was a really fun book. I'm glad I read it. I'm a big horror guy. I love reading horror, thriller, whatever you want to call this. It was definitely a fun read. Glad I picked it up, and probably will be looking at other books by Grady Hendrix in the future. And finally, my book of the year is probably going to be surprising to a lot of people. It is not exactly what you would call a new book in terms of a release for this year, but it was a book that I had seen gain quite a few really good reviews, and I thought, I'm gonna pick this one up. So this book was actually released in 2017, and it is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, I'd heard a lot of good things about Taylor Jenkins Reid as an author, and I was wondering if the writing, the books, the stories were going to live up to the hype. And so I had heard about this book for a while. I had not actually read it, but I kept hearing about it, and I kept seeing Book of the Month had it as a book that a lot of readers really enjoyed. And so I decided to finally pick it up. And so it's a little bit of a historical fiction about an aging actress and her past relationships, how they tie in with a reporter that's working on a story, and there's a little bit of a racial angle as well, but it's just really suspenseful and interesting, and kind of an LGBTQ part of it as well. So there's a lot that goes into this particular book, and I found it riveting. It hooked me right off the bat. The reporter in me really connected with one of the main characters in this book, and the interest of interviewing an aging star I found to be very fascinating, and it just hooked me in a way that I was completely unexpected. And I just got into it, and I was just reading it and reading it. I was riveted. I kept going back and reading parts, and so I got into this one. And then, of course, I did read Daisy Jones and the Six, which I really liked as well. But this is the one that got it started for me with Taylor Jenkins Reid. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo just really hooked me right off the bat. Very interesting characters. Taylor Jenkins Reid, outstanding writer. Just a great writer, great storyteller. Cannot say enough good things about Taylor Jenkins Reid as a writer. So if you have not read this, I would definitely recommend that you give this a try. If you think that it's pretty close to being in your wheelhouse in terms of books that you would read, I would definitely recommend that you give The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid a try. So there you have it, my fiction book of the year, nonfiction book of the year, my historical read of the year, and my series of the year, as well as some of my contenders for fiction book of the year. And so it was a really fun year for reading and stepping out of my comfort zone into reading some different types of books and authors, frankly, that I would not normally have read. I read Sarah J. Maas earlier this year. I read Brandon Sanderson, 2 popular fantasy writers that a lot of people really love. And so that was great. I mentioned my fiction book of the year by Taylor Jenkins Reid, 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. That was a book that I probably normally would not really jump at the opportunity to read, but I'm glad that I did. And so the moral of the story is expand your taste and take some chances on books that you might want to read. You never know when you might find that hidden gem. For now, that's it, and I'll see you probably in 2022. Take care.